This show is 100% independent, non-corporatized activist news, and we'd like to keep it that way. We need your help. To become a Patreon of our show, visit patreon.com/actout. This week on Act Out, the cries of white genocide are growing. What's the psychology behind white death, white suffering, and what can we do to prevent legitimate rage from turning into illegitimate white supremacy? Next up, net neutrality, calling on and calling out Congress, plus Aaron Swartz Day, and finally, the latest attempt to break dissent around dirty energy and the indigenous ideas to always keep that fight alive. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. White genocide. If you're unfamiliar, this concept suggests that a combination of public policy and leftist social pressures are killing white people. That we whites are being forced to assimilate much in the same way that Native Americans were when they were forced into boarding schools and amputated from their cultures and heritage. That diversity is just a code word for a genocide which seeks to remove white people from the majority class and push them into the so-called minority class, which of course begs the question, why do you care? Is it like so-called minorities are not treated well in this country? Now, if you watch this show frequently, regardless of your heritage, you'll likely think the idea of white genocide is a load of crap. And you're probably wondering why I'm even bothering to bring it up. Well, for two reasons. One is that yes, the idea of a white genocide is bullshit. And also, white people are dying younger and more frequently than they were 20 years ago. Back in 2015, two Princeton professors conducted a study that showed that among 45 to 54-year-old whites, mortality rates increased by 8.9% between 1999 and 2013. Most of the increase came from suicides, drug overdoses, and alcoholism. Meanwhile, mortality rates among blacks and Hispanics in the same age group have decreased, largely due to decreases in deaths from illness and other natural causes. In other words, external causes are killing whites, which leads me to the second point of why I'm bringing this up. We know why whites are dying. These external causes are tied to a very specific trend in this country, something that these Princeton professors picked up on because they're both economists. Shocked and intrigued by their findings in 2015, Angus Deaton and Ann Case decided to dig for the reasons behind the rise in white mortality rates. As Deaton explained to the NPR, we think of this as part of the decline of the white working class. If you go back to the early 70s when you had the so-called blue-collar aristocrats, those jobs have slowly crumbled away and many more men are finding themselves in a much more hostile labor market, with lower wages, lower quality, and less permanent jobs. There's a sense that these people have lost the sense of status and belonging, and these are classic preconditions for suicide. Case continues. The rates of suicide are much higher among men than women, and drug overdoses and alcohol-related liver death are higher among men too. But the mortality trends are identical for men and women with a high school degree or less. So we think of this as people, either quickly with a gun or slowly with drugs and alcohol, killing themselves. Under the body count, there's a lot of social dysfunction that we think ultimately we may be able to pin to poor job prospects over the life course. In other words, it's the economy, stupid. Income inequality has risen steadily along with the cost of living. The top 1% is making more than 3 times what they made in the 80s, from a meager $428,000 a year to an average of $1.3 million. The bottom 50% of the U.S. population made an average of $16,000 a year in 1980, and they still do. Those born in the 1980s only have about a 50% chance of making more than their parents, a promise that had previously been granted to every new generation. College continues to get more and more restrictively expensive while also not promising a high or even fair paying job. Steady jobs are also harder to find. The rise of the so-called gig economy in recent years has been heralded as a great way for people to earn some extra cash while setting their own schedule. However, this flat and flimsy explanation hides a sad and indeed terrifying reality. The gig economy is killing us. Don't believe me? Check out this ad. Fiverr, a gig economy company that basically lets you sell yourself for $5 here and there, put this ad out earlier this year. A tired woman looks into the camera with the sort of glazed determination you'd expect to see in a crappy Lifetime film. Under her chiseled and tired face are the words, "You eat a coffee for lunch. You follow through on your follow-through. Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice. You might be a doer." Under this is the bootstrap-pulling zealot slogan, "In doers we trust." All that ad is doing is glorifying a rather depressing and slow suicide. No time for sleep, no time or money for food. I've got shit to do. And as Gia Tolentino wrote in a New York article on gig economy ads like this one, at the root of this is the American obsession with self-reliance, which makes it more acceptable to applaud an individual for working himself to death than to argue that an individual working himself to death is evidence of a flawed economic system. The contrast between the gig economy's rhetoric, i.e. everyone is always connecting, having fun, and killing it, and the conditions that allow it to exist, i.e. a lack of dependable employment that pays a living wage, makes this kink in our thinking especially clear. As economic inequality pushes people into low-paying, unsteady jobs, our response as a society is to glorify rather than criticize the system that drives this push. As we stare down rent or house payments, we see ads like this for Airbnb, telling us to open our homes so as to pay for the things that at one point in time could have just been paid for by having a regular job, even a regular job held by one person in a family of 4. So while our economy doesn't support that lifestyle any longer, our cultural paradigm still supports the 50s Leave It to Beaver notion that if you work hard enough, you can achieve anything. This thereby leads to the obvious stress of economic hardship, but also to feelings of worthlessness. You're killing yourself just to get by, and yet you're still not good enough to get the American dream promised to you by the powers that be. Well, I guess there just must be something wrong with you. So you grab a bottle of alcohol or of pills, and when bad gets worse, maybe you then grab a gun. And of course, these economic hardships are not something that only affect white people. Indeed, they actually disproportionately affect people who aren't white more. But here's the thing. As psychologist Harriet Fraud pointed out in a recent interview with Richard Wolff, whites, and in particular white men, are the one group of people that capitalism has dethroned. White men used to have it all. Access to the best jobs, the best schools, the best homes. And now, to put it bluntly, they don't. People of color, newer immigrants, indigenous peoples, women, the marginalized in our society have not been dethroned. They were never allowed to climb that high. Oppression under capitalism is nothing new to them. And as the adage goes, if privilege is your norm, equality looks like oppression. The continued rot of the capitalist system now reaches the previously untouchable white, and more so white male. His dethroning, his fall into the mass of the oppressed 99% is met with a new horror, which is easily then twisted into a conspiracy against whites by, ironically, other oppressed people. The system looks down and says, well, don't blame us, you should have worked harder. The dethroned looks for answers, and due to the lack of a cohesive left movement in this country that reaches out to poor whites, those answers very often come from white genociders, the white supremacists. A convenient arrangement for the powers that be as well. Indeed, very often echoed by them in both words and actions. The white genocide, blame it on them paradigm takes the heat off of the system and places it squarely on the shoulders of the historically oppressed, the tried and true scapegoats. White supremacists, white nationalists, they offer a story of potential regained glory couched within the destruction of this progressive society. A progressive society that they also claim is responsible for their hardship. Add to this a toxic masculinity characterized by gun ownership, and you have what Fraud calls a combination of capitalism's bloody hand and gender psychology. And yes, that does say consider your man card reissued under a damn military-style rifle. And think about it. Mass shootings in this country are carried out by white men. White men who have lost something, a woman, a job, a safety net. In an echo chamber of self-reliance, white supremacy, and desperado imagery, the recently dethroned find a terrible outlet. And as the stress of late-stage capitalism continues to crack down on whites as well, both male and female, we can't afford to ignore it. For 2 reasons. One, because with this comes a rise in vigilantism and fascism, and two, because we can avoid that via outreach and education, by contextualizing the very real pain and suffering in the greater picture of capitalism, thereby pointing this very real and justified anger towards the architects of it rather than the fellow oppressed. We can't simply write off the pain of white people just because it hasn't been as valid for as long or because it's not as bad statistically as that of non-whites. This system is in fact killing us all. And while we whites have never suffered simply because we are white, white privilege will not be enough to save us from the death spirals of capitalism. And this isn't about not seeing race or some shit like that. It's not about excusing white supremacy or accepting the perspective that white genocide is somewhat legitimate. It's not. And there is never an excuse for white supremacy. This is about needing to understand where some of this hate is born, in legitimate frustrations that give rise to illegitimate prejudice, bigotry, and hate. Whites are a part of the class war being waged. Whites are a part of the alternative that we must create. And while we can't save everyone, we, especially as whites on the left, have to do a better job of trying to save some before they are lost to death, apathy, or a bastion of white supremacist low-life scum.
You low-life scum.
Now, for the umpteenth time, let's talk net neutrality. Much like NAFTA, the battle over the net proves once again that bad ideas keep coming up in Congress like bed bugs in a neglected apartment. The amount of effort it takes to really exterminate these fuckers is considerable. And right now, people all over the country are working to combat this. Wait, can you? Ah, shit.
This content has been blocked by your service provider. Sorry, don't bother trying again.
Yeah, that would suck if that happened to you when you wanted to reach certain sites, right? How badly would it wreck your day if you woke up and found that the internet was broken up by toll roads, roadblocks, and slow lanes? And again, this isn't some crazy shit that's far off in both time and geography. This is happening now and here. FCC Chairman Ajit Pai will soon announce a vote aimed at dismantling net neutrality, thereby opening the internet up to telecom companies and leaving the rest of us in the slow lane, a victim to the whims and wishes of asshole corporations that can and will hold our internet access hostage for whatever price they deem appropriate, on top of the already grossly inappropriate fees that they demand for low-level service. Seriously, our home and business internet fees and speeds are embarrassing compared to what you can literally get in the middle of nowhere Sweden. And I know this because that's where my mom lives, with super high-speed internet. Anyway, the issue is tremendously pressing. I don't need to tell you all the ways that the internet is vital because you know them for yourself and in your own life. Every single aspect of our lives and society depend on the internet. Whatever your issue, whatever your passion, your job, your hobby, this is your fight. Right now, activists across the country are mobilizing on this in order to pressure Congress to stop the vote. Digital rights group Fight for the Future has created an online call-in tool that connects you directly to your members of Congress without holding on to any of your personal information. Another win for efficiency and privacy. The call-in tool also offers a sample script so you don't have to wax poetic on your own unless you choose to. And because calling the Hill is so much fun, here's a list of congressional members to call once you've called your own. And once you've called, which again doesn't take long at all, go ahead and tweet to these members as well. We've included a link to this shared Google Doc in the show. Tweet at them and demand that they do their part to protect the net, using the medium as the message. And a side note, don't be afraid to dig. Check out Open Secrets to see if your member of Congress is getting wads of cash to dismantle the open internet, because a lot of members are. At least 37 members of Congress owned shares in Comcast in 2013. In the 2014 cycle, 373 House members and 45 senators were recipients of campaign donations from either Comcast's corporate PAC or employees of the company. Comcast was also the 8th biggest spender on federal lobbying in 2014. Comcast has 128 federal lobbyists on payroll, 105 of whom have gone through the revolving door. That includes 6 former members of Congress who have now become lobbyists. And at least 50 members of Congress owned some shares in Verizon in 2013, making it the 10th most popular investment for lawmakers. Verizon gave more than $2.2 million to congressional candidates in the 2014 cycle. Follow the money, follow the money. Call your members and call them out. Visit battleforthenet.com to be connected via phone and check out the bit.ly link, Target Members, to get the Twitter coordinates for targeted members. Because our access to an open internet is our access to free speech, our access to information, connections, collaboration, and more. In this digital age, whether you like it or not, you are on the front lines in the battle for the internet. Before we move on to our final story and interview this week, coming up this weekend, November 4th, is Aaron Swartz Day, a day that began in 2013 as a commemoration of the brilliant hacktivist and digital rights pioneer, as well as a day to showcase new projects inspired by Aaron and his work. For those unfamiliar, Aaron Swartz was a brilliant computer programmer responsible for co-developing RSS and Creative Commons. He was also a co-developer of Reddit and founder of the organization Demand Progress. His legal troubles began after he liberated academic journals from MIT, pointing out that collective knowledge should be made accessible to all citizens, not just those that can pay a university to access it. He was further attacked due to his activist and organizing work focusing on dismantling SOPA and PIPA, poorly crafted and dangerously Orwellian digital privacy acts that eventually, in no small part due to Aaron's work, died in Congress. Facing up to 35 years in prison, refusing a plea deal, and hitting a wall after wall in legal negotiations with the state, he committed suicide in 2013 at the age of 26. His death echoes of FBI harassment of activists from the past, the pointed goal of breaking dissent through literally breaking people. The goal of Aaron Swartz Day is to ensure that his ideas will never be broken, that the ideas of hacktivists and computer programmers seeking to build a better world through collaborative and progressive technology always prevail. Indeed, Chelsea Manning, who will be speaking at the event in San Francisco this weekend, specifically cautioned engineers and programmers to consider their work in the context of progress. I think the most important thing that we have to learn, because I think it's been forgotten, is that every single one of us has the ability to change things. You have to pay attention. For engineers in particular, we design and we develop systems, but the systems that we develop can be used for different things. I guess technologists should realize that we have an ethical obligation to make decisions that go beyond just meeting deadlines or creating a product. What actually takes some chunks of time is to say, what are the consequences of this system? How can this be used? How can this be misused? Let's try to figure out how we can mitigate a software system from being misused. To find an Aaron Swartz Day event or hackathon near you, visit aaronswartzday.org. Finally this week, I want to turn to a letter sent last week by 84 members of Congress to Attorney General Jeff Sessions. In the letter, they ask Sessions if he currently has enough power to treat pipeline sabotage as not only criminal, but terrorist activity. Encourages him to treat interference with pipeline systems as an assault on the United States national security, and seeks to define pipeline terrorism as any act that knowingly damages oil and gas infrastructure. With specific nods to the water protectors who fought the Dakota Access Pipeline, this letter is clearly another push to punish in the extreme anyone who stands in the way of corporate profits for the sake of people and planet. And as always, again, if you follow the money, it's not hard to see what inspired members such as North Dakota Congressman Kevin Cramer to sign on to the letter. Cramer's top contributing industry is oil and gas, more than $140,000. And his top contributor, drumroll, is Energy Transfer Equity, aka Energy Transfer Partners, the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline. Clear-cut, overt, and classic bribery. Meanwhile, in news you may not have heard about, 2 weeks ago, almost 400,000 gallons of oil spewed into the Gulf of Mexico in what could be the largest spill since Deepwater Horizon. But hey, at least we'll catch those terrorists who tried to stop the pipeline from spilling. For more thoughts and updates on the fight for people and planet, we are joined by Christine Nobis, Indigenous organizer from Plains Creek Salto. Take a look.
I think that what's happening, it's very clear, it's very obvious that the government and or these people that represent the government currently, are pushing their own agenda in front of the health and safety of the larger population, and they want to secure their money through any means possible. That letter that was sent out is very corrupt. It comes from people that have not a real they don't have any real connection with the rest of the country. They are more concerned with the 1% than anything.
So what are you currently working on? And I know you said that the case is going to the Supreme Court. Was that primarily what you're watching at this point, or are there other battles?
Yeah, well, currently we are supporting the people because there's been over 400 arrests in Iowa against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is pretty amazing considering our fight here has been so much, you know, under the radar of media. We're just continuously trying to keep attention on this topic. I don't want it to die completely. It's like once the pipeline's in the ground, people are just like, well, it's done. But it's not. It's never done. Because this is not just a fight against one pipeline. This is about the whole extraction industry. So we need to continue, especially from my perspective, from an Indigenous perspective, we need to continue to keep that pressure on them. So I don't work with just Ed Fallon from Boulder, Iowa. I work with the Indian Problem, which is like a grassroots collective. I work with Seeding Sovereignty, which is a group that nurtures the media work of Indigenous women, mostly in their fight to protect the environment. I work for Seven Fires Media, which is the media group that came directly out of Ocheti-Shikoi camp. And then also I am like an editor for all sorts of pages on Facebook.
Why is the Indigenous perspective towards environmentalism the better perspective to have when fighting for people and planet?
Well, I can tell you with a simple definition, the definition of colonization. This is just my own definition. It's just the way I like to summarize it. Because colonization is the process of taking land, and through the taking the land and the resources, you have to mitigate the local population either through assimilation or extermination. If we talk specifically about Indigenous people just in the past 500 to 1,000 years, we see that basically the fight has always been about the land, right? And the Indigenous people are essentially trying to fight for the land because not only is that land part of how they sustain themselves, but it's part of their identity and their ideologies about the sacred. When we think about the European perspective, or the Western Hemisphere perspective, I guess you could say, about the land, we can essentially trace back a lot of, and I'm not saying all of it, because of course there's, pagan ideologies and there's, others that come into play, but we can essentially trace a lot of thinking or ways of thinking back to the Bible and to the doctrine that God gave man dominion over the earth. And that's just bullshit. So this is just like a completely it's in opposition to the way a lot of Indigenous people view the planet, which is more of a mother entity in general.
So finally, I want to ask your kind of plans for the future. What happened at Standing Rock saw a lot of Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups coming together and collaborating. Speaking of collaboration, do you see this happening more in the future? Are people collaborating already on different fronts?
So I guess I have this to say when I think about further collaboration. I have to say people need to read more history on what we have done already, and that what Standing Rock wasn't anything new for us. In fact, I have a friend visiting right now in the basement who grew up in camps. He calls himself a camp kid. He's been doing this since he was a child. If you grew up in any Native community, you grew up hearing about people somewhere doing something all the time. I mean, there's Alcatraz, there's Oka, there's the Walleye Wars, there's Wounded Knee, the list is pretty large. It's a pretty massive list of like what we've been doing already. So Standing Rock is not anything new at all, and I want to always make sure that I say that, and I want to give credit to where credit's due. I want to give credit to the people at Standing Rock for what they did before the Oceti, Shikowi, and Sacred Stone camps came up. I want to give credit to all of the Indigenous people on this planet that have been like fighting to death, to their death for the past, let's just say here on this continent, 500 years. Now, with that being said, Standing Rock was somewhat unique in that it did bring in a lot of, I guess you could say, larger organizations and also white people and also people from all over the world into like a common cause. And I hope that this is what this collaboration process brings forth, is this idea of sovereignty. If we start respecting Indigenous sovereignty through this process of collaboration, I think we're really going to get somewhere, because guess what? We are sovereign nations in this continent. I think one of the most efficient and effective ways of fighting these conglomerates, these government-backed conglomerates, because not only are we fighting, these oil companies, but we're fighting the government who obviously supports them. So in essence, not only do we have to fight the governmental systems and these corporate conglomerates, but essentially the economy, because all of this is happening because of their idea of what the economy should look like. So we need to build a more empathetic community through, in my opinion, Indigenous ideologies.
For more on Christine's work, check out the site list in the description at the end of the show. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. Again, check out the last slide in this week's show, as well as the show description, to see sites mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates, visit us on social media. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for none of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging our bitch by